Okay, to form a polar coordinate, you will need theta and the distance. And you start from the origin that's called the polar origin, and you turn theta degrees, and then you move in r direction. To get a better understanding of x and y in polar coordinates is if you take the rectangular coordinate and try to get the value of x and y, you will get r sine theta for y and r cosine theta for x. And as an example, we take the equation for y equals mx plus b and substitute the values of r sine theta and r cosine theta, and we end up with r equals m over sine theta minus m cosine theta. So now we'll take a look at two examples of interchanging polar to rectangular and rectangular to polar. So for rectangular to polar, we have an equation x squared plus y squared equals 9. We substitute the values for x and y. We common out the r square and we get cosine squared theta plus sine squared theta. That's equal to 1. And so we will get the final value of r squared equals 9. So to convert from polar coordinate to rectangular, we have a general equation of r equals 6 over 2 cosine theta minus 3 sine of theta. We will rearrange the equation and we will get 2r cosine theta minus 3r sine theta equals 6. By substituting the value of x for r cosine theta and the value of y for r sine theta, we will get the final equation of 2x minus 3y equals 6.
How to graph a polar equation. Graphing a polar equation uses polar coordinates. Therefore, you can plug in theta and get your r value. You can put these into a table to organize and put it into it. When graphing polar equations, checking for symmetry and finding maximum values of r and zeros can help. Check symmetry across the lines theta equals pi over 2, the polar axis, and the pole can be done by replacing r and theta in the original equation and checking for equivalency between the original equation and the one you replaced. There are many polar graph types. These include limicons, rose curves, circles, and lemniscates. A general equation for a limicon is r equals b plus a cosine or sine theta. If b is less than a, it will be looped, and if b is greater than a, but less than 2a, it will be dimpled. And if b is greater or equal to 2a, the limicon will be a convex one. The general equation for a rose curve is r equals a cosine or sine n theta. The number of petals on a rose curve depends on n. If n is odd, then n equals the number of petals. If n is even, then 2n is the number of petals. The general equation for a lemniscate is r squared equals a squared cosine or sine of 2 theta. The cosine graph is horizontal and the sine graph is cosine graph shifted 45 degrees in the positive direction. To graph r equals 6 cosine 3 theta, first determine the type of curve. This curve follows the general equation of a rose curve, and n is 3, therefore this is a rose curve with 3 petals. Checking for symmetry, cosine is an even function, therefore it is symmetrical across the polar axis. To determine the maximum of the absolute value of r, cosine 3 theta must be 1 or negative 1. This happens when theta is 0, pi over 3, or 2 pi over 3. To find zeros of r, cosine 3 theta must be 0. This happens when theta is pi over 6 and pi over 2. By plotting points of theta and finding the values of r, we are able to graph this rose curve.